I've called the meeting. I will call the meeting to order. And ask for approval of the October 28th, nope, of last month's board meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, approve the agenda
For today.
for today, exactly, thank you.
So moved.
Seconded. Moved by Robin, seconded by Derek. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. And we now have time for public discussion. Typically, we invite members of the public to address us briefly for something like 5 minutes or so. Is there anybody present who would like to address the board? Please.
Okay, for the purpose, can everyone see me?
You know,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Sure. Okay, so for the purpose, so that you all, I'm going to be masked. For those who know me, I am a United States Supreme Court veteran, but I think it's important. I think that it's important for people to understand every word that I say.
I think we can understand you. Is anyone who can understand with the mask on? So I think with the mask on, we can still understand you.
Sure.
And it's a city mandate, so it's not really something for us to be able to do that. This is a city mandate.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
With that being said, good evening. I'm Doyle, D-O-Y-L-E, Landry, L-A-N-D as in David, R-Y, founder and executive director of Authentication Ministries. I have noted, with regard to the upcoming school board election, once again, the achievement gap between African-American men and young boys and everyone else. So, for those of you that are familiar with me, because yeah, at the end of the day, results matter. Results matter. Doing the same thing the same way a different year is results of insanity. And with the school board, either returning members or new one taking shape on Wednesday, the 3rd, the day after the election, where does Iowa City go? Because you can either have champions or the exact opposite. You choose. And what I mean by that is, excuse me, I am a native of Chicago. I am a UI alumnus. I am one who understands the power of libraries. When you make something available to the public, taxpayer funded, it is the responsibility of self-education to walk in and change your world. That's the purpose of a library. So, as a reminder for some new to others, growing up in Chicago and having access to multiple libraries that are world class, our family addicted to education. Again, not for the purpose of pretending like I've never been to a board meeting. You all in this room who are elected officials, because that's who you are, chart a clear course for the future of Iowa City. And now more than ever, this is more important than 15 years ago when the board members decided to have people stop sleeping in the library. And people on one end were like, they are being so heartless. How could you prevent people from sleeping in the library? That's not the purpose of a library. When you understand the purpose of a library, you chart a clear course for the future. So years ago, when you built a teen center, again, thinking forward, those who see the value of a teen center, those are the ones who are living nice lives as adults who utilized the teen center when they were teens. Those who didn't, you see the results. Who are the theys in Iowa City? African-American young men. You can't fix Oprah. You can't fix what you won't face. She would say it all the time. And so you can't fix what you won't face. So here's the solution. In Chicago, verifiable by board examination, meaning the same person who you're speaking here, I attend board meetings of libraries. I talk to directors who report to a board and suggest this solution, a solution that works. Unique for Iowa City is you are literally steps away from a world-class institution where you have students who want to major in fill in the blank. Mathematics. You need credits that look good for your next step in life. Tutor. Boys and young men in the community at the library. What would be the hook? Hip hop. Why? Because everyone does. You get my point. So, to the right of me is Mr. Roland Gibson. He specializes education-wise in the hook between education and pop. A graduate of Cedar Rapids, Washington. Again, as I've said in the past, Cedar Rapids, Washington, and the University of Iowa, specializing and lecturing and having successful programming aimed at African-American boys and young men. That's not me, meaning I don't do hip hop. So when you're a local success story who has been featured in the Little Village and other publications, and everyone knows who you are, it's about passing the baton to someone who can do the job if people are willing to think out of the box. So as I close, local hip hop, Mr. Gibson, as outlined in the Chicago Sun-Times this past Monday, whatever date that was, the 29th or et cetera. Chance, as in Mr. Chancellor Bennett, brother of Taylor Bennett, whom I have known forever. That's not name dropping. For those of us that watched the Bennett brothers grew up in Chicago, whom they are now is how the seed was planted, education, by their parents. Again, after all, when Chance was less known, he would skip high school because he was bored and literally go down the street to the Harold Washington Library to make music. Who cut school to go to the library? Chance the Rapper. So as an adult, you have a man who donates millions of dollars to Chicago schools and art programs. You have to plant the seed and water it if you want a powerful product. And you are definitely at a crossroads in Iowa. It's not a scare tactic, it's reality. Data for you all who are numbers people doesn't lie. It's time that we chart a clear course for all young people, because hip hop just isn't African-American boys and young men, it's that whole generation. So as you will continue to get programming fed by me to your dynamic director, just keep in mind where this conversation started, because again, locally, nationally, the program that's taking place this Saturday in Chicago, Chance and his cohort, Books in the Library, Books and Breathe, it can happen here in Iowa City because he used to perform at the university. So he's very familiar with this. What questions of the board might you have? Because I didn't want that to be cryptic or like, what's he talking about? What is this man? But my point is, for those of you who are used to me, I continue to suggest ideas. I thank you over the last 15 years for listening, applying some things, realizing some things are too far-fetched, but you have to be willing now more than ever to chart a clear course. Personally, I've lost too many young people to violence where, as a United States Marine Corps veteran, I see a therapist, not for military reasons. It's the memories of young people who I knew were going to be this in their life. And the reason why they're not on this earth, yeah, it could be God's plan, but the human in me says they should be here. And the reason why they're not here is violence by a gun. Make sense?
Yeah.
I thank you very much for listening. And again, for your dynamic director, I'll continue to thank him because I'm not going to be here. But it's my hope that you'll seriously consider for start. Again, Mr. Gibson has programming that has been successful. As some of you may realize today was the celebration at the Hilton for the 50th anniversary of the African American Studies program, a graduate of said program. So with that being said, Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Did you
much.
want to say anything about these?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, here you go. As a journalist, that is the latest
Yeah.
copies of the Chicago Crusader. It's the largest, it's the oldest newspaper in Chicago, and it's owned by an African-American woman. When her husband had a heart attack in 1968, Dorothy Lavelle, whose birthday was the 23rd, I like birthdays. She's been the publisher and owner ever since. And again, they break stories that not even the Tribune and Sun Times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So again, that copies for everyone.
Thank you.
And I look forward to you all welcoming a proposal by Mr. Gibson soon.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Is there any other public discussion? I think we can move on to item 4, agenda items to be discussed. First one is the FY23 budget discussion. We've got a budget and brief memo.
I have a corrected document for you. Some of you may have noticed, just they're sort of entry errors more than anything else, but to make sure you got those correct numbers, I don't want to change question. I don't have a whole lot to say about this budget. I feel like we're really sort of returning to a more traditional budget. Throughout the budget prep process, we were encouraged as department heads to think very practically, think very realistically, think about the work that needs to be done in divisions as we sort of do the human work of coming back after closures and to really think about what is this year as far as a kickoff year versus a maintenance year, sort of thinking about those things. So I would say that the budget that we are bringing to the board tonight is on the conservative side. Obviously, there are things that we're asking for more of, things that we're asking for less of, but the process, as always, was very thoughtful. We tried to be very real, very respectful of where the city is, where the library is, where the staff is, and put together a package that would serve us well moving through this year. Happy to answer any questions. Obviously, a huge part of this process is meetings with coordinators, talking about what was spent in previous years, what plans are for next year. So we've got the group here as always to keep the board would like to talk about.
Yeah. Questions or comments for?
And usually when I have a budget, I see income and not just expenditures.
I don't know that the budget and brief has ever included revenue.
But I mean, somewhere, we look at the concept and say, well, the concept looks interesting, but when we don't know what our resources are to compare it to. So can you at least orally tell us, like, can you give us a sense of, or maybe it's also Patty and other people, can we afford it? And what do we think our money will be from the funding sources?
Oh, you mean like from the state?
Well, right, I'm just saying, like, these are
Okay.
expenditures.
I'm sorry.
Do we know what our income is? And would this be running in a deficit? Does it make sense? Everyone, what I'm trying to say?
It does, and we don't have most of those hard numbers. We usually get an estimate of direct state aid, which, if I'm remembering right, was very similar to what we got this year.
Do you remember the?
I don't remember what it was, but we can.
Okay.
We can look it up.
And it maybe doesn't have to be right now, it's just in general, when we're looking at expenditures, I would want to know, like, how's it compared to what we're bringing in?
And that's one of the reasons that we kind of thought, again, let's keep it on the more conservative side. I anticipate that by the time we'll sit down with head of finance with the city, we will have those numbers, and so we'll be able to do kind of a check at that level. But everything I've seen so far, the state looks sort of similar to what we had last year. And since this budget isn't far off that, I feel some confidence there. But I don't know how that's been handled in the past.
Yeah.
Usually at this point, this is a request to the city.
It's the request for the budget.
And then the city, by the time we get to that January, we get a good idea of what the income is gonna be in terms of the levy. And there's other property taxes and that. And at that point, they will let us know whether or not.
So once we know that, then we do our final budget because then we know what our income is and we do adjustments. So this is more of a request of a dream list.
This is sort of, yeah, this is our request, our first pass of, and it's not unheard of that you could go into your conversation with the finance head and be told, you don't have to pull it back so much.
Right.
Go ahead and
right.
loosen those
right.
reins, and in that case, we've got plenty of projects.
That's another dream.
That we can put forward. But this is mostly with what we know now, this is what we're putting forward. One of the things I like the most about being a department head in Iowa City is there is a really active back and forth. And then I've worked in other cities where it's like the lock date was this date and we tell you yes or no. And if we tell you no, this is how much you have to pull out. And that's it. This city is much more, let's talk about it. Let's look at the library and Parks and Rec and Senior Center together. Let's start to see what we can do in different ways. Obviously, there are some big unknowns about things like, will we run into more supply issues? Will there be some things that are critical for operation that they can essentially charge however much they want for because we have to buy them?
Right.
And of course, I'm sure most people here will remember that throughout the year, we do have opportunities to do budget amendments if we need to. So for instance, masks and paper go up tenfold. Those are two things we probably need to operate. So we do an amendment in lieu of just trying to strip other budget lines. But so again, to give that overview, this is what we plan. If the board supports it, this is what we submit to the city for that first round. It's grabbed by our budget management system, and then the financial department takes a look at all of it when we start to go in for our one-on-ones. And as we get those numbers from both the state and the city, we can start to put them into a more fleshed out document.
The finalized version from the city usually comes in March.
And it may be before or after the March packet comes out. But
That's very helpful. I did have one suggestion for the next time this is presented, maybe. I think the percentage increase or decrease is really the key thing that we're seeing in the memo. We want to know, what are we emphasizing more, what are we emphasizing less? But the dollar amounts would also be helpful in that column.
okay,
So that, like, it's a 45% increase in sanitation supplies. Is that a budget buster, or is that just, yeah, we're gonna need some more, but that's not like the year.
sure, that's a great idea. Budget in brief is something that along the line, I'm sure that Susan or her predecessor and a board put together. So it's not, this is a document that could look any way that the board wanted it to. The reason I've continued with it is so you could compare it back to your whole suite of packets. But I think next year, one of the things I'd like to work on as well is making a decision of how many years after an adjustment do you want that removed? How many years of zeros that we remove it?
Right.
And then if do we want to add something in that place? And if so, how do we note it? So that you then don't get confused when comparing it to previous. So I think there's some work we can do on it to make it as useful as a quick guide as possible.
It really is great, though, to have the summary with, pulled out. Here's the things that are changing a lot, and here's why.
That helped a lot.
And I think that I shouldn't, I'm not going to speak for them right here, but I think that everybody, all the quarters felt much more confident this year, thinking about what will the year look like in service design versus last year. So
Less up in the
I hope
air.
so.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a moment in time, but let's hope. And yeah, so that's where we are.
Anything else on the FY23 budget request discussion?
So I think there is board action required
Oh,
that
sorry, I didn't.
approve that this is what we submit forward to the.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve this as a submission to the city. Seconded by Hannah. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? You. And then we've got first quarter statistics and financials. So that's a lot of information about how the first quarter has went.
Yeah, and I feel really good about these numbers. I think that they're signaling sort of a bounce back to what we'd like to see. It just feels much more normal and much more like there's a good, strong grasp of what things are intended to be spent on and where they're going. The notes are just kind of to point out the things that might have jumped out to folks, with the exception of that entry error. Just so that people wouldn't get nervous that we accidentally spent all of our subscription money. Well, yeah, we did, but that was a plan. And just to kind of give an overview, there's nothing very dramatic on here because there's just nothing very dramatic in the quarterly, which is a huge relief to me. And again, moving forward, we will see, we'll continue to see ups and downs, and who knows what the supply chain and cost will look like. But it almost felt, I had to go through it multiple times just to kind of get a grip on like, okay, there is no real outlier content. So it feels like things are where they should be. I mean, the year is young, but it feels like we're where we should be.
Questions or comments? This is something I, for some reason, didn't catch my curiosity in a previous year, but like we bought in adult materials about a couple thousand new titles. Is there a pattern through the year in acquiring, not subscriptions, but hard stuff, or is it sort of the same each quarter?
In terms of library materials, there'll be a little bit of like spring and fall are the key publishing ones.
Okay.
For the most part, we're pretty much on track. These years to see last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, some things.
Okay, so spring and fall are a little bigger.
We'll see what the future will be in the next couple months because they're talking about the book publishing industry.
No.
We saw the article on your website. Nice article on supply chain issues.
For indulging my curiosity.
And that's another great example where we might just have to ask for an amendment for the budget. It's a critical piece of what we do.
Right.
I think if this is just up for a second, with those supply chain issues, is that working to the publisher's advantage because it pushes you towards electronic copies? I'm sorry, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, they might consider that a happy accident.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they're also canceling the second and third, like they're just not.
Right,
what's
yeah,
the
running
date
it.
of the first
Right.
one? Yeah, but I don't know if publishers are ever really thinking about libraries when they're making sales. I don't think they're ever thinking about us until it gets to the electronic return.
It seemed like a kind of an opportune moment, crisis for them.
Interesting. Next item on the agenda is a regularly scheduled policy review. Policy 103, membership in community and professional organizations. Minor changes. Any questions about these changes? This change? I could entertain a motion to approve the policy. Moved over. Yes, that's there.
Oh,
Yeah, the motion was Derek, yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you. And next up is a regularly scheduled agenda item in the sense of when vacancies need to be filled, it comes up. The Art Advisory Committee nominations, we have 3 new members nominated, and we've got their information in the packet. Any questions or comments?
Fantastic. Other than our candidates look like basically the Avengers. That's amazing. That's a really good lineup.
Yeah. And if there aren't other comments or questions, once again, I'm a really entertaining guy tonight. I don't want motion to approve.
Moved.
Derek is
I'm all over it.
all over it. And Hannah's going to take the second this time. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Aye. And any opposed? Okay. You all. And now we've got a first quarter strategic plan update, Ellsworth, and this is not something that requires action. This is informational, keep us up to date.
And this is new. So this is the first quarter update that we've done. So absolutely feel free to say that format worked, didn't work, this isn't what I expected, whatever. Just went through some of the high notes of progress that I felt like had been made this first quarter. Really tried to pull out one of the strongest examples that I felt like would help. I always think it's nice for people to have those talking points, or your neighbor asks what's new with the library, here's what's new. And then put in a copy of the last 6-month update, or the annual update, so you had that as well if you wanted to compare. It felt like that was a better approach than try to give like a nickel and dime. Here's a bunch of little tiny areas that we've hit. So my hope is that at the 6-month update, which is when we give you that updated actual plan document, you'll see these have sort of bloomed into their next stage, and then there's another set of quarterly traction that we've gotten.
This might make it easier to do the end of the year reports too.
It's with all the COVID stuff that's been going on, it's easy to approach one of these updates and sort of think like, oh no, what have we done about the street? And then when you start to talk about it and look at it, it's like, it really feels good. Like that it's really become an ingrained part of our work, and people just continue to put the work in. So I felt pleased with this first quarterly update. And I'm sure there'll be some quarters with more and some with less, but let me start with.
Oh, I had a quick question about increased bookmobile activity. Just a specific clarification. I apologize for the ignorance on it. I know we're creating new stops in lesser served areas. Do we know where those stops are? We're thinking South District.
If you know which ones are new.
There have been several new ones.
Okay.
This time through, I think right off the top of my head.
I know.
I can pull up the schedule from here. Wilson's Orchard is a new one, but it's not.
I mean.
County, but
Just for the
it has
Wilsons.
been
That
well
would be
received
nice.
stop.
Personal stop.
We're still going to Breckenridge, which
And to be clear, the thing I'm really trying to get at here is making sure that our usage of it goes up,
right,
similarly.
every scheduled switch, we sit down and we look at those stops. So obviously, we know like Wilson's during the winter is not going to be visited. So that one is coming out for the next schedule period and looking again at where is going well. Sidekick was a stop and not well populated when we're there. So, and it kind of goes into the formula that we look at. Like that was the first stop, the first time ever. Is it just because people?
Right.
I mean, when we go to Oak Knoll and Legacy
and I'm on here, like, walk on. Where's Paul? I'm like, well, I'm filling in for him today. Hi, I'm Angie. I mean, these are our well
That's
established.
anticipation, yeah.
They know the staff who are on the Bookmobile those days, and then it's like, you can love it. It's like, no.
Who are you and where's Paul?
Yeah, like, no. We'll wait to call. Wait to call. You get me, so,
That's great. That's great, though. I mean, not,
yeah, it is.
not to disparage you, but.
And, you know, pulling in on Fridays with more stops in different locations and on a different day that we typically during the fall and winter, spring don't go on Fridays. Is, you know, we can hit one more or two more schools, we get two more schools in a week, which the school stops. I was at Weber yesterday and the amount of kids who would come on the Bookmobile, you know, it's just awesome. And the state library was there. They did a ride along and a film for state library credit for the rest of the state. And that person's name was also Sam. So I had two Sams on the Bookmobile yesterday, and Sam from the state library, so very impressed. And so it's always, it's still, I don't want to say heartwarming because that's so cheesy, but it is. The kids just like run up as soon as we pull up, the kids just run up, and I know not a lot of people never get to experience that, and if you ever can go experience it, the kids just running up and like running on with their cards and checking out armfuls of books and running back off in the playground. It's just a really cool thing to see, so.
I go to the Bookmobile at an elementary school now. And
It happens, right?
Yeah.
You get mobbed
it's
properly.
bananas. And the teachers are often, like, oh, we're so sorry. If they want to look at books, I'll wait for however long we can get their books.
I did the same thing. My son like breathlessly talked about how when y'all came to the school and he was like, oh, your friends came. And I'm like, my friend, what are you talking about? Oh, the friends.
Way to go, cultivating those
Right?
relationships. And it's hard with a new stop, especially in an area that is like truly underserved, because it's not everybody knows how to approach the Bookmobile or what that is, or, you know, is that a safe place for us to go? Does that cost money? Does it, will they understand my language? And so sometimes the unsuccessful period, the beginning period is a little stretchy. And I think Sam's doing a good job, and Angie and everybody else working on it, trying to discern, you know, is this just not the right intersection to be at, or do we need to give it 4 months?
Let it stick.
You know, do we need another schedule cycle to just kind of let it ease into, and if you can get sort of one neighborhood liaison to take a step onto it, that you might find success. And I think it's always tricky, but it's something that we talk about a lot and try to, you know, we've only got one, and so we want to maximize the resource, but we never would want to say, well, we tried it 2 weeks and nobody came, so we moved on to the next one.
So is there a need for interpreter services at some of the stuff? I mean, is that something that we really should be including in our plan?
I haven't talked to Sam about that. We talked about adding more resources for translated documents.
Right, I'm just saying, if you had a person there that could bridge them in, even if you're only hiring that person for a couple hours a week, an hour or two here or there, would it, especially when a new stop is established, would it help create relationships?
We are working with, it's a church, and we have Raquel, who's in the children's department, who's fluent in Spanish, and to make sure that that is a stop.
I think it's more diversity than that, like even the smaller groups are even more challenged,
Yeah.
of feeling alienated.
To make sure that she's there, because she can interpret or, you know, just
Right.
be.
Because I mean, almost wondering something we should market if we did have an interpreter for, like, we invested in it for a year in our brochure saying when it stops at these stops,
a
Languages are
second
available.
language person will be there.
Almost in a similar vein of
Right.
multilingual story time with the kids where it's,
Yeah.
you advertise that, it's getting really.
Right, and so that there'd be comfort to at least come in and figure out what the rhythm is, but it would be a cost, but.
I was gonna say, I think along the lines, if it was someone from, that neighborhood
Right.
that could serve, if it is somewhere new you're trying to establish, someone that, knows the neighborhoods can help
Yeah.
bring families in.
I think only volunteers, though, can be disrespectful for the skill of the bilingual person, and
So
so.
I'm not saying volunteer, I'm just saying,
I
like
think like
creating
if
some
we
sort
could
of
budget this as a
relationship. I
service, that's something
understand.
that could be predicted. I
Absolutely.
mean, it might be a value. that could-
But you're right, that's something that's cropped up already organically. So like in my neighborhood, the closest church is Resurrection Assembly, and a lot of the parishioners there, French is their first language. And so we had people speaking French and guiding them around. Yeah,
I
there's
did
a need.
put some resources in the Noble budget sort of loosely for that.
Yeah.
Reaching out to the community. We've made it really clear with the earlier translation services that we have, as a library, no intention of exploitative labor.
Right, right, well, right, and I didn't mean to
Yeah.
insinuate that, I just think that a lot of times we also let the community like volunteers, like some point, we also have to say, hey, this person has unique skill set, I'd like to pay them.
No, I love the idea of, we have several lines in the budget where we could hire somebody as a very limited term
Right.
consultant,
Right,
a contract worker, a contract vendor that really just maybe comes into the library, gets some training, and
Yeah.
then meets us at the bookmobile.
right, because the concept of a free library could be very foreign and very
Absolutely,
intimidating.
absolutely. And we want to be able to answer all those nuanced questions
Yeah,
about,
right,
I do want to take these books, but what if a dog chews them up? What if, I have a lot of.
and what there's an fee that I don't see coming. And-
Right, what happens? Do I have to take, can I bring them back here? What if you change your
Right,
stuff? All that.
right.
So I love that idea, and I think I'll have to look back at how we worded it in Nobu, but I think we would even have that flexibility this budget year if we could figure out a mechanism.
Great, thanks.
Does the dog a jab at me?
So what?
Does the dog comment a jab at me?
No.
None of us made eye contact.
Those are our favorite.
So next item on the agenda is an update on the first quarter fine free. And we have a memo in your packet on that. I think it's fair to say that the summary of the memo is that we're figuring out how to get data. That's good.
Some of the data was really taking a singular entry for each piece of it, and
Yeah.
so we're trying to figure out if we are going to use that, what's our sample size, and how do we incorporate that in a fair way?
And I still question whether it's generalizable. This was too weird a period.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions?
So
The
our plan is to review implementing this policy permanently at the beginning of FY '23. Am I reading that correctly, or does that mean we should have it be an agenda item for our first meeting for FY '23?
I think that the concept right now is to keep updating the board sort of on the data we can get. We'll do a more formal 6-month update. And, any questions that come up now, we'll obviously take note and try to answer those when we come back to it. To just be really frank about it, I feel like there is a level of relying back on the anecdotal here. The community really likes what we're doing. We continue to watch our national peers kind of one by one make this decision. I don't want to say it feels just like the next step we should take, but to be honest, I mean, that's where my head and my heart are pointed, but I absolutely want everyone at the table and by extension of the community to understand why we made the decision, that it wasn't just a feel good, to heck with everything else kind of decision, and that it was mindful. I mean, the fact that we've cut their revenue stream now for 2 years without a lot of
Nothing's happened.
feedback about it, I think does speak to the argument, but so we continue to try to balance that, But now this library system did it with, and here's some evidence from our library that it will serve a positive purpose.
Is there anything we were naive about? Anything that the staff caused staff stress or things that we just hadn't taken into consideration?
I feel like I underestimated the amount of actual people hours it would take to get some of the numbers out. I thought that would just be like a general report you could run. We can run reports on all these different things in our systems. I thought, for instance, the loan time would be something that we could just put the right information in and just spit it out, and it's not like that for some of it. But otherwise, I think that all the legwork that was done for the children's fine-free decision, I think that was great work, but doing it as a segment sort of leaves you with less raw information to play with. Because you've taken that big swath out of the pool. So we're talking about a smaller amount of information plus, or, going into another part of the pandemic. So we just kind of got short of the stick there on two sides, but
I want to support your notion that it seems like it's pretty clear that it's the right thing to do. And we probably have to show the community that we did it really carefully. So I don't know what it takes to show the community. Maybe it's not a whole ton of numbers, but I think we have to know what that story is that is convincing. And I do think the fact that everybody's doing it is that's a useful piece of evidence that it makes sense.
If I could be blunt, I think the nearly 2 years have already spoken for itself. And for me personally, it's just a matter of waiting until we can vote on it.
But I'm hopeful that in my conversation with Dennis, the finance, the department head for finance, and then next step of that is presenting in front of council about the budget, is that we can get them to share the enthusiasm and to really take on that mantle of, this is something that we're really proud to offer to the community, and it does support so many of the initiatives that we're taking on. I've had a chance to meet a couple of the folks running for council, and unprompted got several comments about enthusiasm for the library and looking forward to sort of seeing what happens next. And I think that's a key stakeholder group that we want to share this achievement, because I think it is, even if it feels like everybody else is doing it, it's still a big deal. And I think since it's so related to the DEI work that we're doing, and all of the other pieces the whole city is pushing towards, the more we can make it a shared experience, the better. So it's in my notes for my conversation with Dennis. It'll be however I could appropriately fit it into the very short January presentation to council, which is like 3 to 5 minutes. It's not going to be anything grandiose, but to get those talking points in so that nobody's surprised to see that we have once again not entered that revenue. Right.
Would we be able, I'm not sure because there's so many variables here, but when we were looking at this, we had a heat map about where the fines were in Iowa City and Lowell. Would we be able to compare a heat map before this and after to show usage change when we drop the fines? Though I think it might be came by COVID and public transportation, other issues.
Right.
I
A lot of other things
still
going on.
wonder if there'd be a change in that heat map at all. Is that, but I'm not sure if there are other things that are going to taint that. I'm just thinking that was our argument at the beginning of saying there's a disproportionate effect of some of this on certain communities.
I've got an idea on that. And it goes to establishing this kind of as a table stakes and equity in the community. And we could tell that story, I think, with the heat map, like you're saying, Robin. But to put even a finer point on it, what if we were to, for example, and maybe this is too bombastic, but if we were to look at a heat map of those deactivated cards, as it were, And then compare that to, for example, free and reduced lunches in our community. If we can draw a line between those two things and say, listen, these kids are getting underserved. Not just kids, these people in the community are getting underserved. And this is how we draw that correlation. That could be a pretty, for lack of a better term, damning connection to make.
The map from 2018 for the kids, I did compare.
That's where it was in my head. Thank you.
I think it was those kids.
Has free and reduced changed enough that it's gonna be different, like
Lunch is free right now.
everybody.
You know, the schools, they ask for families to complete the forms if they were to be eligible, but I can't imagine that nobody are doing that on a wide scale basis.
I think that's the right direction. I also wonder if we isolated some of the things that might have been less affected by COVID use pattern changes, like if we pulled out electronic materials and
Right.
print, a certain collection of print resources before and after. I mean, I think that we could do heat maps, kind of showing the movement. And then from that, decide what supports, what story do we see in them, and then pull that out as part of it.
It may be difficult with the way that we collect data, but at the same time, the visual is powerful when you only have a moment to tell your story.
And I think we can get fairly granular with the heat map, so we might actually shrink in more specifically to look at some of those hotspots and see what the difference is. We can think about that.
One thing I would ask if we're gonna have two heat maps from different times. Be careful to make sure that the scaling is the same on the two, because we've seen heat maps before here that
You can't compare.
red meant a different thing.
Yeah.
Love to see them overlaid on each other. Just go look. Anyway.
Well, good progress on that. And the next item on our agenda is a change in state law affecting who can drive the bookmobile now. I can't.
Everyone.
You can, okay.
It scares me.
Honestly, it's really, if you put what it costs out of your head, it is really just like driving. Yeah, I did. I went to my dad's farm truck. It is really kind of like driving a big truck. No. It handles very, it handles very well.
Okay.
Big Blue is very nice to us and handles well on the road. You just gotta really watch your mirrors, which we train for, taking those curves. And I will say that we all have spilled books and you laugh.
It's okay.
It happens, they tumble and you scramble to put them all
There's
back.
two stories being told here, though.
I like this up.
And have you driven the bookmobile? Okay. This room has driven it? Oh, that's me.
You had a special license.
I did go get a special license. I drove a dump truck twice.
Brilliant.
Twice. I drove the dump truck twice for the city and then was given a license to drive a bookmobile. So, yes, I was about to go into a meeting and we had a new employee, Raquel, who I knew was going to go take their driving test, and all of a sudden on my phone ID, it said Iowa Department of Transportation. I'm like, do I send this meeting or do I answer this? And I answered it, and Raquel made them call me because she's like, I knew you were not going to believe me when I came back and said I didn't need a license. And she was right, because I was questioning the DOT on the phone. I'm like, no, we have to. This is what she's like. I know. I gave all of you your licenses, and yes,
I'm well aware.
state law changed it. I said, so I can walk and just anyone I can pull out of this library. It's like, as long as they have a driver's license, they can drive the bookmobile.
Yeah, which is complicating for us because we relied on being able to say they were trained, they were licensed, they had, the right number of training hours. Obviously, we will make a plan for that.
Yes,
I know Sam's already working with other fleet departments because this doesn't, Well, it probably does technically only affect us, but they've got the similar training issues,
Yeah.
so we'll put something together. I don't know if ABOS would have anything to say about, that's the Bookmobile Association. I don't know if we're the only state that said this kind of a change, but
It is, that's
So-
what the DOT told
To
me.
get more truck drivers.
oh,
Yeah.
Deal with supply chain issues.
okay, so,
I could go drive a book truck.
Let's get
Or
those
semi.
books out, let's get the chain
I don't like this.
yeah.
I mean, I see in my profession, the continued deprofessionalization of professions is troubling, but.
Will this affect our insurance?
Good enough.
I don't know. I think that's something that Sam's talking about with the other departments. I certainly would never just send somebody untrained out to drive it. But it does, I mean, I feel equipped to develop a training program for driving the wheel? I don't. But we'll lean on our resources, we'll figure it out and make a plan. And the other, like the departments that work with us on training with the small garbage truck and things like that, they're so awesome. They're super vested interest in making sure that we're safe, that we know what we're doing. So I have no doubt that we'll get lots of peer support that way. And I'm sure they'll continue to let us, use their training facilities and things.
Yeah, they do not like it when the bookmobile comes in because it's such a specialized equipment. I mean, they'll fix it, but anytime, because it's unlike any other vehicle we have in the city fleet. So, they are very well invested in us.
Yeah. Okay, well, good to know about that. So we have come to the section of the agenda with staff reports. We can start with the director's report.
Part of the report, but we were moving such a clip. I didn't want to put a wrench in it. I have an updated output statistics that the only correction is the Bookmobile statistics. Carol noted that we had listed zeros for Q1 Bookmobile use, and that was incorrect. So I'm just going to pass this around so you have a correct one in your file. Otherwise, the biggest thing on my mind in the report is watching that natural gas price increase. We have, I don't know if people remember hearing from Brad in the past, the way that our HVAC system is set up is we actually use natural gas heating year round, even as part of our cooling system, to push some of the exhaust out of the building. Obviously much less in the winter, but that is something that we simply cannot go without, even if the building were closed because of essential building maintenance. So we, the document that Mid-American sent out, I think it was something like 46 to 96% increase. That's a pretty significant guess, and we're gonna keep an eye on it. We're not alone. Lots of other city buildings use natural gas. And so I don't, it's not scary as if, we're just trying to deal with it by ourselves, but that could have a citywide budget impact that could really make a difference. So we'll keep an eye on that. Brad Gerke does an exceptional job keeping up with that information, with staying in contact with other colleagues in different cities about is there any prep work we can do? Are there any solutions that we could be putting in place ahead of the game? And the only other note I would make is that the COVID take-home test kits have been moving pretty quickly. It took a couple weeks, I think, for people to realize that we had them, and now they're moving right along. So at this point, we can request an unlimited number from public health every week, and they bring them over to us. We put them out, tell people we're asking, 5 per family, or take what you need, but we don't obviously chase anybody down or let them go. But I think it's I think it's a really great offering that's letting some people have some peace of mind, especially as public schools are sending those emails about just letting you know your kid had a potential exposure. You don't need to do anything. But it's nice to be able to grab a 24-hour kit from the library or city hall. So as far as I know, all Johnson County public libraries are offering.
Andrew, just for people without, I don't know how the resourcefulness kits are sent. For people without addresses that are here at the library and pick them up here, people are homeless, how do they get the results? Do we serve as a place that can be contacted with some kind of code? They
They
can
they
ask?
come by email. The results come
So they can go
by
through email. So we do make it available because email. Okay. The second thing I wanted to ask you, which was unrelated to COVID. Can you give us an update on the egress issue with the tripping?
So we have had no more incidents, but there has been no more action on the handrails. They did ask for renderings of putting handrails in, but that's the last thing I think.
So quite a while back when we had this discussion, we tried to clarify who has the liability. If it's the library or the city, if we should be sued, because now there's been repeated falls and we know we have a risk. Has that ever been clearly responded to by the city? Because we do not have the ability to fix it ourselves, but this is a library egress where people are getting hurt. Does my question make sense?
It does. I feel like when I asked that, the response was that's part of.
There's
the
still,
city
but I still think if we need to get that repeated by the city, now that we've had repeated falls, to say,
Yep.
we continue to remind you, and we want to make sure, just that we have a paper trail in a sense that we have repeatedly asked for this to be corrected,
I could ask,
but we can't do the correction, so we can't.
we can't, although I have threatened a couple times because I'm not sure the vendor really would double check. I mean,
Right, but I mean, there are patrons that are falling, and this is a concern. I feel like we have some standing in this.
they put 2 additional red planters out, which cuts down the amount of space that you can walk, but that was before the last fall. So I'm not saying it made a big difference for that person, but it did. And we have had the doors locked since that last
Okay.
fall.
So we're looking, yeah,
Not the.
so we're locking doors not to use a door, but I'm wondering, is this something where you need us to create some awareness of this issue through editorials, or what are you asking? What would help? Because I would prefer not to wait till the next person's hurt, especially as ice gets added in.
Would it work for the next step to be, I can reach out to both risk management and legal?
I mean, I don't know.
Just say that we want absolute clarification. The board has requested clarification on the liability of an injury on that
Right.
step. Is it city, is it library? How would that transpire? And a concrete timeline of the repair.
The timeline would make me feel better, just that, it just seems like we haven't moved on this in over a year and I don't know how many people have to fall before. Like,
We could ask
you
them.
tend to think this is a problem.
Yeah, I will reach out this week and we'll see.
Would you let us know if you need the board to do something supportive
Sure.
on this?
I think you could say which boards ask for a report next meeting on those issues.
Is it something where we should be thinking about inviting someone from the city to come to the board meeting at some point and just address this if we don't get a timeline? Maybe not for the next meeting, but in January, something that we follow up, because we're the advocate for the community.
I think if we can't get a
Hold that over their head.
timeline
Right.
with evidence, plus the answer to the liability question by the next meeting, I think that'd be great.
If you could just keep a tickler on that, so
I will, I'll put some.
I just want to see us have, say, well, we're willing to let 2 more people fall before we do something.
Right.
Anything else? Well, we'll move on to the departmental reports. We have reports from Children's Services, Collection Services, and IT this month. Learned all kinds of interesting things there, so thank you for sharing those reports. Any questions about any of the reports?
just realized that's, I believe my daughter in the roller skating picture.
Ah.
I did not catch that before.
With the leaves?
No, in the roller skating, the white
Oh,
shirt and
underneath.
the jean shorts there. Pretty sure that's Val, yeah.
They planted that.
Yeah, I tell you what.
Nope, I just asked my staff, I'm like, send me any pictures you had for the last month, and that was one of our very first in-person events that we went back to, was the roller skating, and it was a partnership with Iowa City Parks and Rec, so.
Awesome.
We're really exploring our partnerships with other city departments, right? Getting good results from them.
Thank you.
I have a little agenda of mine.
Yes.
So I know I sent you an email about outage we had for the deadline a couple weeks ago. So that's more detailed what happened, and I think I would like a little analysis about why it happened.
Mhm.
how to prevent it.
Yeah, I'm asking, yeah, exactly. Why, so that we understand how to prevent it.
So I think there's a couple of factors. One is the way we're doing our database access from off-site that required frequent certificate to be reviewed quite frequently. I think that just introduced more opportunity for error, just happens so much that things can go wrong. Another problem that we tend to work against as vendors try to prevent us from talking to them directly. So there's more and more, like some vendors like Overdrive, there's no way to talk to them. You just have to put the request in and their wait times are, in weeks. Now, these two vendors, you can call in, but at least with III, you have to be pretty aggressive to get to somebody. And then with support people, there's always a big variety and close competence and how much attention they're putting towards your ticket, and you don't really know that upfront.
Sure.
Into it. So in terms of changes, of course, we'll be more careful about watching the dates. Basically, what happened was they expired the certificate, and we don't know why, and we spent several hours with them. We don't know what happened, but here's a voucher for some more time. So also, we made a change to the way we're doing the database authentication so that we don't have to do the certificate. So now it's just every 2 years or whatever the replacement time. And that will be more expensive to ship it out. It'll be well worth the cost. And we had already identified that certificate as that process is kind of a problem. And, so our ILS administrator said there is a solution. We just need to pay what for. Also, I realized as I was working through this that I could have been more aggressive with the vendors, just and as I did become more aggressive. And get to somebody, and I finally got the III person, for example. I realized that he sort of read the ticket back to me and sort of said, "Oh, I had it all backwards. I didn't understand." He also said, "Yeah." He sort of said something offhand, like I was working with 20 different things right now. So he was sort of scattered, and really he just honestly wasn't. So once I got him to understand what he was supposed to do, then it got this kind of fill in the days.
Right.
But I also realized that I should have been. I made the ticket too complicated. Like I put everything together in one ticket, and he said, we only just do one thing. So those were things that I kind of learned on the way, and I will be more aggressive about that. But I just wanted to lastly to say, I think the one thing we did do right is something that we've had sort of things in the past, but we really kept the staff up to date. I think on the progress of the issue, I was giving us a bit of something changed over the period. And I can also include the board if it's a sort of high level service thing.
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't see the board needing rapid updates. But yeah, if it's a hair on fire issue, we should know there's a hair on fire issue. After a while, if nothing's happened, I don't know what that is, but
It's when the
That's
media
just my
calls.
perspective, when the media calls. You know, it's, in some ways, it's analogous to a physical plant problem that's really scary, right? You want to fix it as fast as you can. This, I think, is frankly much harder because you're locked into vendors. You can't threaten to leave your ILS vendor. You know, that can't happen, so. I think it's a real hard situation.
Our new catalog provider is right here.
That's right. There we go.
We know how to.
Yeah, right. You can find him.
It always goes both ways. I mean, the problem with having your own day off is that you can always get in there and pick up the day, if you're here, but I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
You know, it's on a weekend or
Go on
something.
vacation.
Or go home.
Yeah.
To be here.
Having our own catalog, that's a big deal. I feel like it
Yeah.
sort of has gotten lost in a bunch of other things happening, but that is not something that many public libraries our size have the staff expertise and resources to do. It's pretty awesome. And I think there'll be a learning curve, and some people in the community will like that, some won't. But once we get over that hump of the little differences,
Don't forget.
I think people are, I think it's gonna be like everything else in IT. They're gonna hate it when it breaks, because they like it when it works.
Right.
They just take it for granted. So I'm excited about that catalog.
Thank you. That brings us to the Development Office report, Betty.
Are delighted that local libraries lit is back with Baron and now includes the first anywhere in the country, every public library, the university, and the big community college working together to bring these programs. So the first one is coming right up on November 9th. Came together rather quickly, but that's okay. And as I read about the wonderful Prairie Lights folks, said, sure, let's be in person. And Betty, let's do online all day. Like,
Right.
win-win for both of us. So that would be a busy week. The next foundation board meeting is also on November 9th. So we go from that to a program. And it's great. Happy to answer any questions.
And is there anything under the miscellaneous category?
Only that we have an opening on our board.
We do have an opening on our board, yes.
You know, usually we're encouraging of people that we know that might round out the board to apply.
Just a reminder, of course, this fulfills the existing term, so it's a 2-year appointment, it's not a traditional length. And it will be in the, I forgot the date.
November 20th.
November 20th.
It's open now.
So it's the day after.
We actively advocated for people in the community that we think would be appropriate to consider applying because not everyone notices when they're open commission positions.
No, I
But
think
we're advocates.
any of the candidates the applicants for the previous vacancies will be contacted by, my understanding, by city clerk who says, we will put you back into the pool unless you opt out. So those folks will be back.
My recollection is that your application stays active for a year. So anyone who's applied in the past year. Anything else in the miscellaneous category? Okay, President's report. Carol gave me a brief report to read, right? You didn't receive this, right? Okay, well. Once again, I owe thanks to Tom for filling in for me this month so that my husband and I could make a trip to Florida to see our grandson. Do I not look like Carol?
No, keep going, that's great.
At the last meeting, I let you know that Kelly Fulkenbrock had asked to attend the meetings of her board term for the rest of the board term via Zoom. The discussion that followed led us, that is to say Ellsworth and Carol, to reach out to city officials for an opinion regarding this. Rachel Kilberg, Assistant City Manager, and Eric Gores, City Attorney, both responded that technically this would be acceptable that we should be cautious about going this route, saying that it might set an undesirable precedent, cause additional work to library staff, and that it might create issues with the requirement that a majority of members be physically present in order to hold a meeting. Kelly and I exchanged messages, and she has opted to resign from the board. On October 6th, she sent me a letter of resignation, which I forwarded to the city clerk, Kelly Fröhling. Vacancy appeared on the next city council agenda. The opening will be advertised for 30 days, and previous 2021 applicants who were not selected will be notified of the vacancy. I presume that we may have a new board member sometime next month. In November, I will be appointing a 3-member committee to evaluate the director. If you have an interest in participating in this process, please let Carol know. Ideally, the committee will include at least one member who has been involved in this process previously. The committee has quite a bit of latitude to decide how they want to proceed. We can rely on previous committee members to share their experiences. The final evaluation will likely be presented at the February 2022 meeting. Reminder, the board picture is to be taken at the beginning of the November meeting. Respectfully submitted by Carol Kirsch.
There's a lot of stuff in a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
Feel bad, still thunder.
Are there any announcements from members? There are no committee reports, or are there? No committee reports. Communications were included in the packet. Anyone have any comments or? Which brings us to the consent agenda, which includes approval of the minutes of our previous meeting and approval of September's disbursement. Motion to approve the consent agenda. Moved. Derek got it again. Seconded by Nava. There we go. All in favor, say aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Let's see, we'll set the agenda order for the November meeting.
And this meeting is off for them because of Thanksgiving.
Thank you for the reminder, yes.
The next two are just quick turnaround.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
The next two are the early.
right, the next two are early because of the holidays. Got the document that we can use, so.
Sure. What we currently have on for November is, like Tom just said, appointing the committee to evaluate the director. Board member recognition dinner update. It's going to be a light update, I can tell you. Policy review 813 unattended children. Policy review 817 alcohol in the library. Departmental reports, adult services, and community and access services.
Is the December meeting on the 23rd?
Till the 16th,
16th. Thank you.
unless we would like to decide to.
No, I was already gonna say I wasn't gonna be there, so. I would just say, we have questions of quorum if it was on the 25th.
I'm making a note to check my calendar, make sure I got those on there properly. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. And as I've learned, I need a quorum adjournment.
In Berlin.
Adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Stuff done.
There are disbursements to sign.
Oh, I didn't.
Did our coordinator gain another position?
Oh, this is it. Disbursements for presidents.
Hey, Brad.
How's your program?
Well, I don't have anything to order dinner.
Peanut butter sandwiches.
But I think there's an end in sight now.